Some children grow up before they even understand what childhood means. They learn responsibility earlier than joy, and in that rush, they lose pieces of themselves. They become the emotional caretaker of the family. They fix problems they never created. Their innocence becomes currency. Growing up too fast teaches a child one painful lesson. Your needs don't matter, and they carry that belief into adulthood. They become hyper-independent. They trust no one to catch them, because no one ever did. They turn into tiny adults, calm, responsible, quiet. Everyone thinks they're mature, but it's just trauma wearing a suit. When a child grows up too fast, they learn to predict danger before they learn to spell their own name. They become the family peacemaker, the mediator, the one who holds everything together, because the adults won't. These children rarely cry, not because they're strong, but because they learned early that no one listens. They apologize for everything, even things that have nothing to do with them. Guilt becomes their second skin. Childhood ends the moment a child learns to survive instead of play. They learn to stay quiet, to not disturb anyone. Silence becomes their safest home. They become good kids, not out of kindness, but out of fear of causing trouble. They don't ask for help, not because they don't need it, but because needing help once got them hurt. In adulthood, they become the strong friend, the reliable one. But inside, they're still the child who had no one. They were told to be mature, but no one told them how to be loved. They form deep emotional bonds quickly because they never had safe ones. Growing up, they fear abandonment intensely because they were abandoned emotionally long before they even understood the word. They overthink everything, every word, every tone, every silence. They become perfectionists, not for achievement, but for safety. Mistakes once meant danger. They grow up believing love must be earned, because unconditional love was never given. When a child grows up too fast, they learn to hide their emotions like secrets. Vulnerability feels dangerous, not natural. They become people pleasers, not because they enjoy helping, but because staying useful kept them safe. They feel older than their age. Childhood slips away quietly, replaced by responsibilities too heavy for small shoulders. They learn to observe everything, every sound, every mood shift. Hyper-awareness becomes their survival tool. They grow into adults who say, "It's fine," even when their world is falling apart, because that's what they were trained to do. They take care of everyone except themselves. Self-neglect becomes normal. Self-love feels foreign. They learn to accept disappointment early. Broken promises become part of their emotional vocabulary. They grow up believing they're too much and not enough at the same time. A paradox born from emotional neglect. Trust becomes complicated. They trust too easily, or not at all. There is no middle ground. They learn to act older, to feel safe. Maturity becomes their shield, not their choice. These children bottle up their emotions so tightly that eventually, even they forget what they feel. They don't understand rest. Stillness feels unsafe. Their mind is always running. They learn independence early. So early that depending on someone as an adult feels impossible. They become highly empathetic. They feel everything deeply because they were trained to sense others' emotions first. They learn to suppress their anger. They fear conflict because conflict meant chaos growing up. They stay calm during crises, not because they're strong, but because they learned early that panic wasn't allowed. They become the listener in every group. They learn to listen before they learn to speak. They grow up afraid of being a burden. Asking for help feels like a crime. They become adults who over-explain everything. They learn to justify their existence from a young age. They rarely feel safe. Safety was never consistent, so their mind stays alert, even when life is calm. When a child grows up too fast, they learn to solve problems they should never have faced. Responsibility becomes their childhood companion. They apologize too quickly, not because they're wrong, but because they learned peace was their responsibility. They overthink everything. Their childhood taught them that one small mistake could cause chaos. They grow into adults who hide their needs. They learned early that their needs were too much. They develop emotional maturity far beyond their age. People call them strong, never realizing it was survival, not strength. They often grow up feeling parentified. They act like the adult because the real adults weren't able to. They become the peacekeepers. They learn to smooth tension before it exploded. They rarely asked questions as kids. They learned answers wouldn't come anyway. They become overly responsible adults, feeling guilty even for things far outside their control. They learn to stay quiet. Silence became their safety mechanism. They grew up saying, "I'm okay," long before they ever understood what being okay really meant. They avoid drama as adults. They already lived through enough emotional storms as kids. They become overly self-sufficient. Depending on others feels risky, even unsafe. They learned that love must be earned. Affection wasn't given freely. It came with conditions. They struggle to relax. Rest feels unproductive. Stillness feels unsafe. They think deeply, too deeply. Childhood forced them to analyze instead of play. They grew up waiting for stability, for affection, for someone to notice their hurt. They learn to hide their excitement. Joy feels temporary, fragile, easily taken away. They become the strong one in every group. No one realizes they became strong because they had no choice. They grow up feeling older than their age, but inside, a small child still waits for the childhood they never had. When a child grows up too fast, they learn to comfort others before comforting themselves. Their own emotions become secondary. They develop hyper-independence early. Needing help feels unsafe because no one was there when they needed it. They become emotionally guarded, not because they don't want love, but because they fear losing it again. They learn to stay alert. Their environment taught them that calm moments can turn chaotic without warning. They become overly polite. It's not manners, it's survival, learned from walking on emotional eggshells. They suppress anger, because they were punished for expressing it. Their feelings became threats instead of signals. They grow up believing they're too sensitive, simply because no one nurtured their sensitivity. They often struggle with identity. They spent childhood adapting, not discovering who they truly were. They struggle to trust others. Their earliest experiences taught them that promises break easily. They often have a serious expression, even as kids. Playfulness didn't fit into their survival mode. They learn to predict emotions. Hyper-awareness becomes their shield against unpredictable adults. They often feel invisible. Their needs blended into the background while they kept the household functioning. They become overachievers. Success becomes proof of worth in a world that never affirmed them. They fear disappointing others. They grew up believing mistakes carried heavy consequences. They avoid asking for favors. Childhood taught them that asking leads to rejection or conflict. They grow up feeling older inside, even if their age says otherwise. Childhood ended before it began. They often become emotional caretakers in adulthood because they played that role too early. They struggle to identify their own needs. Childhood trained them to ignore them. They developed emotional armor. Vulnerability wasn't safe, so they learned to stay guarded. They often feel responsible for fixing broken people because they spent childhood fixing broken situations. They carry guilt from childhood into adulthood. They blame themselves for things they couldn't control. They become perfectionists. Flaws were punished early, so they strive to be flawless now. They often overthink every action. Childhood taught them that mistakes have consequences. They feel invisible in group settings. Early life made them adapt to blend in quietly. They often avoid conflict. It wasn't safe to express anger, so they learned to appease. They internalize adult responsibilities too early. Play was a luxury they couldn't afford. They often feel lonely. Their emotions were ignored, so isolation became normal. They adapt quickly to change, but often hide true feelings. Emotional survival was necessary. They sometimes struggle with trust. Dependence felt unsafe, so self-reliance became the default. They are often highly empathetic. Experiencing others' pain became part of growing up fast. They feel pressure to be strong. Weakness was unsafe, so strength was learned early. They struggle to ask for help. Asking meant vulnerability, which felt unsafe. They often hide excitement or joy. Showing happiness could be risky if dismissed or envied. They sometimes feel emotionally disconnected from peers. They matured faster and feel out of sync. They are often responsible beyond their age. Tasks beyond their years became the norm. They often avoid mistakes at all costs. Early experiences taught them errors were punished harshly. They often carry adult worries as children. Childhood became intertwined with responsibility. They may struggle to express vulnerability later. Guarded habits started early. They often take on others' emotions. Empathy became survival, not choice. Growing up too fast leaves lasting impressions. Awareness is the first step to healing and reclaiming childhood.